10,000 years from now, someone is going to dig your phone right out of the dirt and call your entire civilization a fairy tale.
A myth about people who flew, who spoke across the entire planet, and were interconnected in real time 24/7. They'll decide that all of that never happened. We're already doing the same exact thing to everybody that came before us, so why wouldn't they do the same thing to us? Forgetting like that doesn't happen on its own. Someone always decides what's worth keeping, what gets buried, and you can feel them making the same call about your own life right now. An algorithm decides what you see and what you feel about it, and you never agreed to any of it. They'll even look you in the face and say that one day you'll own nothing and you'll be happy about it, like they're running a global kindergarten of grown adults. The richest, most powerful people on Earth are quietly preparing to survive the end of the world. They're buying islands, building bunkers, backing up the food supply of the entire human race in vaults carved into frozen mountains. And while they do all of that, they keep telling you the same thing on a loop. Everything's fine, trust the experts, you'll understand when you're older, don't ask questions. I think those two things are connected. I think they are preparing for something they know is coming, and I think the reason they don't want you asking questions is buried in the one place we've all been trained to very carefully ignore: the ancient past. Just so you know what you're looking at in the background, this is an ancient cedar forest in Mount Lebanon, and they show up in one of the oldest stories humanity ever wrote down. I'm specifically trekking a nearby area, so it's not exactly the Cedars of God, but it is still the same area. Now, the story they show up in is the Epic of Gilgamesh, which was pressed into clay more than 4,000 years ago. In it, the hero treks to a sacred forest of cedars, cuts down the tallest trees, and builds a raft to carry them home. And in that same story, Gilgamesh goes searching for the one man who survived the flood that drowned the entire world. The same flood as Noah, written down more than 1,000 years before the Bible. So that's where I'm at right now. Now, we only have readable written history going back to about 5,500 years ago. That's about it. Everything before that is dark. Go back 10, 15, 20,000 years. And the only thing we can do is dig things out of the ground and guess. No archives or documents or any records that we can read, really. The ancients did leave us something, though. They left us their stories. Almost every culture on Earth carries the same memory. A great flood, a cataclysm that nearly wiped out the human race and left a handful of survivors to start over. You know, the flood of Noah. That's one version. There are hundreds of others on every continent, told by people who never met and could never have copied each other. Plato gave us Atlantis, a whole civilization, advanced and proud, swallowed by the sea in a single day and night. And what does mainstream science do with all of this? Well, it shrugs it off as mere superstition. They often say there was a local river flood somewhere, the primitives exaggerated it, it scared them, so they told each other it covered the whole world. And Graham Hancock, who made the series Ancient Apocalypse on Netflix, he spent more than 30 years pushing back on exactly what mainstream archaeology likes to stick to.
I've been exploring the possibility of a lost civilization in prehistory for more than 30 years. Archaeology claims that if there were such a thing as a lost civilization, they would have found it already. Well, I profoundly disagree with that.
And he says it cleanly. These myths are the memory banks of our species. They are the only record we have of a period before 6,000 years ago. And instead of studying them, we sneer at them. And mainstream archaeology guards that line like scripture. The official story says civilization began when writing did, around 3,500 BCE, and that everything before it was primitive. No cities, no organized society, Nothing that really counts until farming showed up and supposedly made all of it possible. They will defend that timeline to the death. Then they dug up Göbekli Tepe, which is a sprawling complex of carved stone pillars in Turkey, some of them weighing as much as 20 tons, raised almost 12,000 years ago by hunter-gatherers, people with no farming, no metal or writing. The ones we were told were too backward to organize everything. Somehow they quarried it, carved it, and stood it up thousands of years before the first city existed. And this isn't really a one-off, by the way. Site after site is surfacing that tells the same story. The timeline they swore by was wrong, and the people they wrote off as cavemen were building wonders long before the books said they could. That is amnesia at the scale of a species. The memory of who we were is up on the shelf we can't reach, and the people who put it there would rather you never went looking. And it turns out these stories were carrying more than memory. In fact, if you study the oldest myths closely enough, you'll find that something else is hiding inside them. Math. In the 1960s, a professor at MIT named Giorgio de Santillana, a serious historian of science, co-wrote a book called Hamlet's Mill with a German scholar by the name of Hertha von Deschend. What they found was that ancient myths from all over the world contain the same specific set of numbers. And those numbers describe something called the precession of the equinoxes. What that basically means is that the Earth wobbles very slowly on its own axis, like a spinning Beyblade losing its speed, for those of you that remember what these are. One full wobble takes around 26,000 years. To even notice that wobble, let alone measure it and bake it into a story, you need precise observations of the night sky kept up for centuries and hundreds of years of careful record keeping minimum. So what that means is that somebody, a very long time ago, knew something that sophisticated. And the only place it survived is inside these myths we've been taught to brush off. That's the pattern I want you to lock onto. Real knowledge, hidden in stories, waved away the moment it doesn't fit the official story. But the memory is still there, buried deep within our consciousness. So you saw what they did with Göbekli Tepe. The evidence was sitting right there in the dirt, and they would sooner defend a broken timeline than admit what it meant. That reflex goes past archaeology. Think about how it actually works when someone challenges the official story. About anything, the first response is almost never curiosity. It's ridicule. You get called a crank, a grifter, a conspiracy theorist. And when ridicule doesn't shut you up, something harder usually does. And every one of us has felt a softer version of this. We felt it in school, where the questions that poked at the official answer got you a sigh and just trust the process. And a lot of us felt a sharp version of this a few years ago during a certain pandemic, when an entire planet almost overnight was told to stop asking questions, trust the experts, and treat anyone who pushed back as a danger to everyone around them. When knowledge threatens power, the response is almost the same every single time. Mockery first, and then total censorship and erasure if mockery fails. It's the same move you already know from when you were small. You reach for the shelf, the hand comes down on top of yours, gentle but firm, there to remind you that some things are just not yours to know. Which brings me to a story that figured all of this out and dressed it up as a cartoon about pirates. If you watch One Piece, there are a few minor spoilers ahead. Maybe they're not so minor, but I'll try to keep them as light as possible. The entire series is built on a mystery called the Void Century. 100 years of history that were erased from the records by the world government. and the government will kill anyone who is even mildly interested in what actually happened in those 100 years. There was an island called Ohara, an island of scholars built around a giant tree that held a library of the world's history inside it. These scholars learned to read an ancient government-forbidden script, and they started piecing together the truth of the Void Century. The moment the government found out, they issued an order called a Buster Call, which is basically sending a fleet erasing the entire island. The library, the research, the people, all of it. They were so determined that no scholar escaped, they sank an evacuation ship full of fleeing civilians just to be safe. Now, one child survived, and only because one Marine couldn't go through with it, and he let her live. And then the government told a story about what happened. They said the scholars of Ohara were dangerous people trying to use forbidden knowledge to destroy the world. They turned the victims into villains, and they erased the island from every map. Now, years later, in the same story and show, a scientist who had been forced to work for that same government learned far too much. So he rigged a message that was supposed to broadcast automatically the moment his heart stopped beating, knowing what he knew would get him killed. And when they killed him, the broadcast began. What he told the world was this: the continents are going to sink into the sea. And it has happened before, during those erased 100 years, when a great and advanced civilization was swallowed by a flood, and what was left was nothing but scattered islands and the survivors starting over on the leftover islands. The catastrophe was not natural. It was actually caused by their own weapons, and the powers that buried this history did it to keep their grip on the world. And those powers were the same world government that runs the world today. Now, the government's answer to that, you can guess, is obviously to send its highest authority to wipe out the entire island and everyone standing on it, for no reason other than to stop that message before it could finish. So an advanced civilization destroyed by a flood, erased from the record, and the survivors rebuilding on the ruins with no memory of what was lost. That is Noah. That is Atlantis. That is every myth on this planet, handed back to us through this cartoon about pirates. And the creator isn't hiding it. He put a giant ancient ark in this world and named it Noah. Straight out of the Bible, he's pointing right at it. And none of that is an accident. Every story arc in One Piece maps to something real about people and power. Slavery, racism, propaganda, loyalty, friendship, freedom, control. Everything Oda wrote was deliberate and significant. So when the central mystery of the whole story is a government that erased 100 years of history, hit a flood that already drowned the world once, and murders to keep it buried, I don't read it as mere fantasy. This is probably the most honest thing in the show, and it does get deeper than this. The genius scientist at the center of all of this, the smartest man in his entire world, spends his life chasing a single obsession. He's trying to rebuild the lost technology of that erased civilization because he has proof that it was real. Sitting on his island is a giant robot, an ancient one, built more than 900 years ago, a machine so far beyond what his people can do that he studies it for a lifetime and still can't copy the power source that made it run. The most advanced mind of the modern age, outdone by a relic. And the show says it flat out. The technology of that lost world was greater than anything they can build today. And there's something similar in our real world we can point to, and I'll get to that in just a little bit. The ancients had technology. Real, working technology, in some ways past our own. And the people in power need you to believe the exact opposite. That the past was primitive. That none of it matters. That you're standing at the peak of everything. So keep your eyes down and stay focused on what you can see today. And never look too hard at what came before or at what's coming for you, for that matter. Now, building off of that, I want to go back to Hancock just a little bit, and the part that really stayed with me. The lost civilization he talks about shows up in myths as a golden age, a time with no violence or cruelty, where there were great healers and sages, where abilities we scoff at today, things like telepathy or telekinesis, were treated as an ordinary fact of life, a culture that grew out of something humble and made something beautiful. And then the myths take a turn. That culture stepped away from whatever made it pure. It got arrogant and it started imposing its power on everyone around it. And in story after story, that hubris, that injustice and cruelty is the same exact reason the cataclysm comes. The gods grew angry, the flood is sent, humanity gets knocked all the way back to humility and is forced to start over from nothing. A great humbling, you could say. This is the oldest pattern in human history. Civilizations rise, they get arrogant, and then they fall. Sometimes a comet or a flood does it for them. Sometimes they do it themselves. Hancock also said something else that I just couldn't shake off, but we are that lost civilization. 10 or 15,000 years from now, people will tell stories that our ancestors could somehow speak to each other in real time, 24/7. The entire world was interconnected. We can fly, we reached space, we even reached the bottom of the ocean. And the experts of that future age will say it's a fantasy that never happened, or they'll say that our own arrogance brought about this downfall because we thought we could reach God by building the tallest buildings humanity has ever seen. And he said if we're sick enough in the head as a species, we won't even need a comet. We'll do it to ourselves. That, he said, is what nuclear weapons actually are. Mass suicide for the entire species. Hatred is a force, and you only have to look around to see how much of it is being manufactured and aimed right now. Look around you. We tell ourselves we're the smartest, the most advanced humans have ever lived. And we use that confidence to wave away 300,000 years of people who came before us as primitive, even though they left behind ruins and objects so precise, so deliberately aligned, that our best engineers still can't fully explain how they did it. That arrogance might be the most dangerous thing we own. We picture the ancients as cavemen waiting thousands of years for us, the smart ones, the main characters, to finally show up. It's a flattering little story, but it's also a fairy tale. Now, in the One Piece story, like I said earlier, there is an ancient machine that supposedly shouldn't have existed. In our world, there is something similar. There's something sitting in a museum in Athens right now. In 1901, divers pulled a corroded lump of bronze out of a shipwreck off a Greek island called Antikythera. For years, nobody knew what it was. Then they looked closer, scanned inside it, and what they found rewrote what the ancient world was supposed to be capable of. It was a machine, more than 30 interlocking bronze gears, cut by hand, more than 2,000 years ago. You turned a crank on the side and it calculated the positions of the sun, the moon, and the planets. It predicted eclipses years before they happened. It even tracked the 4-year cycle of the Olympic Games. A hand-cranked computer, 2,000 years old, and nothing else this complex shows up anywhere in the record for over 1,000 years afterward. So a piece of technology that advanced appeared and the lights went out on it for a millennium. The only reason we know it ever existed is that one ship happened to sink, one corroded lump happened to catch an archaeologist's eye in a museum, and then it took us the better part of the century to even realize what we were holding. If that survived by pure dumb luck, what didn't? How much knowledge rusted, burned, sank, or rotted in the ground and took the proof of itself down with it? And the better question is, what was deliberately hidden away by powers that still exist today? We unfortunately have no conception of the ancient worlds besides these handful of things that happened to survive it. Everything else is gone. The point is the arrogance, that flat, unbothered certainty that they just couldn't have. That whatever they had, it must have been less than ours. We are the peak, the finale, the cleverest to ever walk the earth. Who told you that? And why do you believe it so completely, if you do? Again, there's stonework from the ancient world that is so precise that people still argue about what tools could have cut it. Maybe they had machines we'd recognize, maybe they had ones we wouldn't. We can't know. And the one thing we have no right to be about any of this is certain. Because that certainty and lack of curiosity and quiet, continuous conviction that we are the greatest thing that has ever lived on this planet is the exact disease every one of these myths is trying to warn us about. It has a name. It's the hubris that always, always comes right before the fall. Okay, here's my theory. I think authority does not want us seriously researching ancient civilizations. And the reason is that the past is a warning. And the warning is aimed straight at the path we're walking today. If enough people truly understand that advanced, proud civilizations have risen before us, gotten arrogant, rotted from the inside, and destroyed themselves, they'd look hard at our own moment, the degeneracy, the spiritual emptiness, the arrogance, the decline you can feel in your gut, even when you can't articulate it, and they'd see exactly where this road ends. A lot of them would refuse to keep walking it. Some might even revolt. So the past stays buried because it's much more convenient for those in power. It stays quote-unquote primitive, and we get taught over and over again that we are the peak of everything, that nothing before us could possibly have anything to teach us about how this ends. Because the day we learn how it ends is the day we stop cooperating.
Stand up and fight! You're in the army now.
Human creativity, the actual living spark of it, is being traded away for an algorithm that prints money for whoever owns it. The machine doesn't dream. It measures what keeps your eyes on the screen, and it feeds you more of that, forever, because that's what pays. And the people that run that machine have every lucrative reason to keep it running for as long as humanly possible, even when the slow price of it is everything that made a civilization worth living in. The art, the meaning, the soul of the thing, all of it flattened down into engagement. And they will run it right up to the edge and straight over it, because to them, the math always says, just keep going. Why wouldn't they? When it finally comes down, they have no intention of standing in the rubble with the rest of us. They already have built the way out. Underground, behind steel, guarded by men they are nervously certain will still take their orders once the money is gone. And I'm not guessing about those men or those orders. We know they exist because one of them said it out loud. There's a book by a media theorist named Douglas Rushkoff called Survival of the Richest. He tells a story about being flown to a remote resort to advise 5 of the wealthiest men on the planet. He thought he was there to talk about the future of technology. He was wrong. They spent the entire time asking him how to survive what they called the event. That was their own word for the collapse they're expecting. And one of them, a man who had nearly finished building his own underground complex, asked Rushkoff a question I need you to really hear. He asked how he could keep control over his own armed security guards after the collapse, once money meant nothing. These people are preparing for the end of the world as we know it, and wargaming how to keep their hired men obedient when there's nothing left to pay them with. Peter Thiel quietly arranged himself a New Zealand passport. There's an entire luxury industry now, companies building blast-proof shelters with pools and air filtration and years of supplies for clients who can afford to vanish, of course. And it isn't only bunkers, it's land, remote, defensible land, in places most people will never set foot. Right now, Jared Kushner's investment firm, with Ivanka Trump as its public face, is developing a luxury resort on an island off the coast of Albania called Sazan. And guess what? Sazan is a former military island, a Cold War fortress that the old regime packed with thousands of concrete bunkers and a web of underground tunnels, guarded so heavily that a CIA memo once called it a Red Gibraltar. Officially, the plan is hotels and villas. Maybe that's all it is. But the shape of it is hard to ignore. People at the very center of power, quietly securing a remote, fortified island that was already built to survive a war. Then there's the food. You've probably heard this one whispered. The truth is stranger than the rumor. There's a vault called Svalbard Global Seed Vault. I think that's how you say it. The press nicknamed it the Doomsday Vault. It's drilled deep into a frozen mountain, and it holds backup seeds for the food crops of the entire human race, sealed to last for centuries, in case the rest of the world's food supply fails. That one is real, and it's run openly by the government of Norway. So I won't dress it up as a secret. It sits in the Arctic in the far north. But travel to the other end of the planet, down to Antarctica, and the food is absolutely stored there too. A lot of it. Every research station on that continent is provisioned to survive completely cut off for a year or more, through months of darkness when no ship and no plane can reach them. One Australian station was reported holding over 80,000 kilos of food and more than 1 million liters of fuel. The American base at the South Pole has an entire survival wing the crew calls the lifeboat, sealed behind a fireproof wall with its own power, heat, water, and food, built so everyone there can ride out a total disaster. Now, obviously, there are good, boring reasons for all of it. You can't run to a store at the South Pole, I know that, but the most isolated, hostile, locked down place on the planet, the one continent no ordinary person will ever set foot on, is stocked to keep people alive through the total collapse of everything around it. I'm not here to tell you who all that food is for. I'm telling you it's there. The rest is up to your curiosity. And in case something happens in the future, then maybe we know what dots to connect to find out. Hopefully, it won't get there. So to put it together, they expect a reckoning. They're hedging against it with islands, with bunkers, with vaults, for the seeds of the world and a continent. Quietly stocked for the end, and the entire time they're looking you in the eye and telling you to relax. And One Piece already shows us this exact move. There was an island called Flevens, rich and beautiful, built on a white mineral the government knew was toxic. They knew for over 100 years, and they kept selling it anyway because it made them rich, while it quietly poisoned every person living there. When the sickness could no longer be hidden, the ruling family fled and were given safe harbor by the world government. Then the surrounding islands were told the disease was contagious. It wasn't. The island was sealed off, soldiers were sent in, and the people were wiped out to bury the evidence. One child walked away alive, though. You can watch the show to find out who. So they poisoned a whole people for profit, slipped out to safety when the truth got close, and erased everyone who could tell it. So why not just warn everyone? Why would they do what they're doing? Why would they go through all that trouble? And if they can see it coming, why steer us toward it instead of away from it? Well, because the road is profitable. Power and money both point in the same exact direction. and turning the wheel would cost the people holding it everything they have. So they play it simple. Keep walking the road, keep everyone too distracted, too divided, and too closely watched to be able to do anything about it. And the tool for being watched is the AI surveillance state that is being built, where we are also willfully handing over all of our information for. One search and one message at a time, and we call it progress. But the machine is not the thing in charge. Whoever operates the machine is the one in charge.
Why should people care about surveillance?
Because even if you're not doing anything wrong, you're being watched and recorded. And the storage capability of these systems increases every year consistently by orders of magnitude, to where it's getting to the point you don't have to have done anything wrong. You simply have to eventually fall under suspicion from somebody, even by a wrong call. And then they can use the system to go back in time and scrutinize every decision you've ever made, every friend you've ever discussed something with, and attack you on that basis to sort of derive suspicion from an innocent life and paint anyone in the context of a wrongdoer.
When everything you say, search, and text gets recorded, nobody needs to build you a prison. They just need a file. They announce the next opinion that's forbidden this week, and suddenly that private message you sent years ago becomes a leash around your neck. Fall in line, or we will make you an example. And they know that a big enough slice of the population will fall in line out of fear and keep the rest of us frozen. A divided, watched, sedated, and ashamed population is a very easy one to steer. So how does this actually play out? The way I see it, there are 3 doors. Door 1, they manage the decline. They use the surveillance and the control to delay the reckoning for as long as they possibly can and squeeze every last drop of profit out of the road on their way down. Door 2, it goes wrong anyways, and hubris always overplays its hand in the end, and they retreat into the bunkers we built for them, and they watch the world burn from behind blast doors with their seed vaults and their loyal guards for as long as that comfort lasts. Door 3, the one they are actually afraid of, a reset that comes from us instead of from the sky. Enough people wake up, see the road for what it really is, and they refuse to keep walking it until the authority that was never on their side loses the only thing that ever held it up: the cooperation. Now, I won't lie to you and call that the easy ending, or the likely one. Waking up costs something. It is heavier than staying asleep. It means looking straight at how bad the road is and not flinching, while every screen in your life is engineered to keep you comfortable, distracted, and a little bit afraid. And fear is the mind killer. That's exactly why they're betting you won't do it. The whole machine, the surveillance, the noise, the division, all of it runs on that one quiet assumption that deep down, you would just rather not know. But ultimately, the one thing that cannot be controlled is the mind. You are still the person who decides whether that's true. Nobody actually has the right to hold the entire human inheritance out of your reach and say that it's for your own good. That was always just a story they needed for you to believe. Every civilization that ever fell left us the same warning buried in its midst. Have humility and be humble, or the humbling comes and finds you instead. The flood was always a story about pride, about what happens to people when they decide they're untouchable. We are writing the next myth right now, in real time. And the only question that matters is that the humbling that comes at the end is one that we choose for ourselves, while there's still a choice to make, or one that gets chosen for us. Now, maybe I'm wrong about all of this. Maybe it's all just hocus pocus and I'll look like an idiot for saying it out loud. I think it was worth saying anyways. Now, if you made it all the way here, some part of you already knows which door you want to take. The choice is yours.